Hello, CKA aspirant. If you've clicked on this video, I'm assuming that you're preparing for the CKA. You've probably finished the syllabus and you're about to give the exam, or maybe you're just starting your preparation. In either ways, this video is going to be quite helpful for you. I've completed my CKA certification almost a year ago, and since then, I've gotten quite a lot of experience with Kubernetes and tons of hands-on with it. So I'm going to share some tips in this video, which will help you to not just ace the CKA exam, but learn Kubernetes in a way that you can actually apply it hands-on, whether that's in a personal project or in some industry use case. Some of these tips might already be obvious to you, and you may have heard of them, but I can guarantee that if you watch this entire video, you'll get a tip which you didn't know before. So without further delay, let's go ahead and start with the tips. So tip number one, and this one is quite obvious, use shortcut commands as much as possible. Within your exam terminal in the CK environment, you will have auto completion for kubectl. So make sure that you use the shorthands for different Kubernetes resources. For example, you can shorten down deployments to deploy or services to SVCs, and there are many more. For the complete list of shorthands for all these resources, you can check out the Kubernetes documents, or you can use kubectl list API groups, and it will give you the name of the resources along with all of the shorthands for each. My second tip is more towards the folks who are still in their learning phase. While you're learning, don't memorize the commands. Instead, I want you to memorize the workflow. What exactly happens after you run something like kubectl run pod nginx? Visualize that entire workflow. kubectl is sending the command to the API server. The API server goes and does something else, then something else is happening. I want you to visualize that entire workflow and understand each and every component. Why is this thing happening? Why can't I do it some other way? Or there might be multiple ways to do something. So why does that happen? Take another example, static pods. Static pods get created when you put a manifest in /etc/kubernetes/manifest directories. Great. Now you put a correct manifest file in the correct directory, but your static pod is not created. Why? How are you going to go ahead and debug that? This is the type of workflow that I'm talking about. Understand what happens behind the scenes. The answer to this example is you have to check the kubelet configuration for the static pod path. The path is probably set to a different directory, and that directory is where you'll need to go and put this particular manifest file. So understand this entire process, how each component works. Take your time learning. You don't have to rush and finish the entire syllabus in like 2 weeks. Take your time, take 2 months, take 3 months, whatever, but understand the concepts really well. If your aim is to be a DevOps engineer in the industry, spending a good amount of time learning the inner workings and configurations of every resource is going to be invaluable in the future. Tip number three, and this is quite obvious for anybody who's already been studying for CKA, you need to get really familiar with Linux. If you're not familiar with using Linux, then these are some concepts which you should learn really well. Package management, process management, navigation within Linux, operators, and systemd. If you know these five concepts, you'll be able to clear CKA without any hassle. Now, if you're not familiar with any of these, or if some of these concepts are unknown to you, I have made an entire Linux playlist covering each one of these topics. So you can go and check it out. I'll link the playlist down in the description so you can check it out from there. My next tip, and this should probably come under the Linux point itself, get familiar with how the terminal works and how bash works. So in bash, you've got tab auto completions. If you press tab twice, the command which you're typing usually goes and auto completes. How does that work? And what exactly is getting auto completed? Figure that thing out. That will help you save time during the exam. It will help you solve questions faster. You might be saving even just 1 second, but saving even that 1 second is worth it. Next step is another Linux based point is get really familiar with a text based editor. Now, I don't care if you want to use Vim or you want to use Nano, just use any CLI based text editor and get familiar with it, as familiar as you can. You're going to have to work with a lot of YAML, and indentation is the tricky part with YAML. You will get it wrong very easily. So just get really familiar with the text editor, especially for indentations, how it works, its productivity features, etc. I've made a video on Vim as well, and I'll link that down in the description as well if you want to check it out. Next point is about Kubernetes. Make sure you do enough repetitions so that typing those kubectl commands becomes muscle memory. You don't want to spend some time just thinking exactly what you have to type or the order in which you have to type. For example, kubectl context. You don't want to sit and think, do I type context first or do I type config first? Practice that enough times so it becomes muscle memory. Similarly with get commands and describe commands. You don't want to put a dash o YAML in front of a describe command. Dash o YAML will only work with kubectl get. So make those kind of things muscle memory. The only way you can make it muscle memory is by continuous repetition. During the actual exam, before you move on to next questions, make sure that you validate your answer. If you're learning right now from a resource such as Code Cloud validates the answer for you. But during the actual exam, nobody's going to be there to validate your answers. So you need to make sure you validate it yourself. So my advice to you would be, when you're doing your practice runs, when you're doing your mock tests, get into the habit of validating your answers yourself before the platform validates it for you. My next tip is again for folks who are just starting out their learning journey for the CKA exam. Learn by referring to the documentation. Whether you're giving the exam or you're working in the real world on a real production Kubernetes cluster, you're going to be using the documentation. You're going to refer to the Kubernetes documentation a lot for a number of different things. Why should it be any different when you're learning? If you're confused about something or don't understand how something works, go to kx.io, learn to find that particular page you're looking for, and refer to the documentation. Read through the documentation multiple times, learn where things are located so that you can save some time during the actual exam. And even during actual real world scenarios, you know exactly what you're looking for and where it is located. There's no need to memorize entire YAMLs, how it is written, what API version it is using, what kind it is using, what all comes under spec. It's useless to memorize all that. Just go and refer to the docs and do the same thing when you're learning. Get into the habit of referring to the docs while you're learning so that during the exam, it is quite easy for you. When you're practicing any questions in CK, when you're doing the hands-on labs, do it in such a way as if you're sitting in the exam environment right now, or you're operating an actual real world cluster. If you put yourself in that kind of a mindset that I'm giving the exam right now, even though I'm in my learning phase, you'll be much better equipped for dealing with that last minute exam stress. Or whenever you go and work on production clusters for the first time, you'll have that confidence that I know exactly what I'm doing. And even if I break something, I will know exactly how to fix it. So put yourself in the headspace that you're giving the exam or you're working on an actual cluster while you're learning. My next tip is about YAML. Get a good feel for how YAML should look like. That means indentations. For example, if you want to define a security context, there are two scopes in which you can define a security context. One is in your pod scope and one is in your container scope. These are both applied at different levels. Their indentation in the YAML will look different. Get a feel for how these particular indentations should look like. If you get a feel for that, you'll have to refer to the documentation a lot less for indentations. Refer to the documentation for getting the base YAML template. But if you're just copying particular snippets and pasting it within your environment, it's possible that your indentation is going to be wrong. If you have a good feel for what the indentation should look like, then you don't have to constantly go to the documentation, find that particular resource, and see what the indentation should be. No, you'll just have a good feel for it. You can put the indentation to what you feel is right and then apply it. If there's an error, then go and refer to the documentation. If there isn't, then you just save yourself quite a bit of time. And my very last tip, and I even alluded to this a little early on in the video, Try to save as much time as you can. Try and find the tiny hacks which will save you even 1 second of time. I know 1 second might not sound like such a big amount of time, but even if you can save that 1 second, you've saved quite a bit of time. Imagine if you find 10 different shortcuts which save you 1 second of time each. You just saved yourself 10 seconds in the exam. So all of those seconds that you save adds up. And in CK, you want to make sure that you get as much time as you can, especially for the larger questions such as cluster upgrades, which consume quite a lot of time. So those were my tips for cracking the CKA exam. If you've enjoyed these tips, please do let me know down in the comments and leave a like on the video as well. If you want help preparing for your exam, do join my Discord server. The link is down in the description. And all the best with your CKA exam. And I'll see you all next time.